welcome to Travels with Geordie. If this is your first visit, my name is Peter Knowles and I live on this classic wooden motor cruiser here in Victoria, British Columbia, along with the loving memory of my pup Geordie, all the while fixing it up for some pretty ambitious cruising someday. If that's the sort of thing you might find interesting, please consider sticking around and subscribing. I'd love to have you. Well, shooting indoors for this intro because it is absolutely blustery outside. Anyway, the long-awaited heating system, or at least the very beginning of the heating system bonus episode. And as always, I'd like to send a big thanks out to my supporters on Patreon and PayPal because it's you guys that make this happen. Thanks a lot. Let's get going. I promised we were going to get into talking about heat. And that heat is both the heat for the hot water heater as well as space heat for the boat. And what we're going to set up today is just the beginning of that, and that's the heat that we can extract off the engine through a heat exchanger. Anyway, let's open everything up and I can show you what I'm talking about. So down into the engine bay we go. So everything is red in here, isn't it beautiful? Oh my gosh, you beautiful Beta Marine. But this particular hose here is not part of the engine. Well, it is, but I added it. Basically, this is, if you think of in a car, you can extract heat from the engine. When you turn the heat on in your car, you're getting heat. And that's from hot water from the engine that runs through a little radiator underneath your dash. And it's fed by a heater hose. Now, this is a section of heater hose. As an option on this engine, I got what they call califier ports, because in the UK a heat exchanger or a heat exchanger with a tank in it is called a califier. Anyway, so basically it's two 5/8 ports on the engine that are in line with the hot water heating circuit. In fact, more beautifully than that, they're in line with it ahead of the thermostat. So when the engine is starting to warm up, before the thermostat even opens and starts to cool the engine through the heat exchanger, the main raw water heat exchanger, it sends hot water through this circuit that you can use to heat your boat, your car. In my case, both the boat and the hot water, the domestic hot water. Anyway, what I have this hose on for is basically just a short circuit between the two ports, one of which is under this big heat exchanger and the other one up in here. So what I need to do is be able to disconnect these from here and connect them up so that they're going to the hot water heater. So when you turn on the engine and the engine gets hot, the heat from the engine will heat your hot water, which is super nice because if you're cruising for, I don't know, an hour or 2 hours a day, you have hot water every day without having to find some other way to make hot water, because the 5 or 8 or I can't remember how big my hot water tank is. It might be 11 gallons. Stays hot. That's your whole evening dishes and everything. You'll even get a shower out of that if you're careful. Anyway, so let's connect this all up, but there's a trick. And the trick is I also want to heat the boat, the air in the boat, the space that I walk around in with the heat from the engine while I'm cruising. So I need to be able to tap some of that hot water off into something like this, which is basically a water to air heat exchanger. Basically the hot water goes through these coils and the fan blows air through, extracting the heat off. You're all familiar with this. In the automotive world, this would be a heater core. So, or a bus heater, some people call them. So that's great. I have a whole bunch of those and I'll spread them through the boat and I'll be able to run hot water through those to get heat off. They're not that simple. There's a few steps to making that happen efficiently that I've given a lot of thought to. Now, one of the main things is this engine won't be the only source of that hot water. When I'm at anchor and I don't have electricity, or not a lot anyway, I can't use electric heat. The engine is off, so I have no more waste heat from the engine. I'll have a Webasto diesel furnace, which is a toy about this big. I've talked about it before. I'm going to show you a picture. I'm pretty sure. Yeah. Anyway, it's a lovely little item. They're used largely in Europe for preheating cars or trucks or keeping them warm instead of idling them. Basically, it's a diesel-fueled and then electric-controlled fan, pump, etc. hot water heater, boiler. So it's also going to go into this circuit so that when I need heat, hot water, either for the water heater, the domestic hot water, or the space heating, I just flick on that Webasto and start a pump and start circulating all that water through the hot water heater and all the bus heaters. Okay, it's still not that simple, because if it's all in the same circuit, a couple of things happen. That large circuit I don't want to be in use year-round, because there's no sense running hot water to the ends of the boat through all the space heaters when it's summertime and I don't need any space heat. I just want to make domestic hot water. And I don't want to be running the Webasto hot water circuit through the engine because it's a massive heat sink. It would take an hour to heat that. I made that up. A long time to heat that engine up. So it'll suck all the heat out of the heating circuit when I'm really just trying to make a little hot water to have a shower. So there's ways around both of those, and they're not complicated, but they have to be sort of done in the right order. The first step to not heat the engine with the Webasto loop is to keep the engine in its own separate loop. And I do that with another heat exchanger. It's an endless loop. This is a plate or a brazed plate heat exchanger. Basically, it's a bunch of tapered stainless steel plates that are brazed together with magic gaps. If you look closely, you can see that the stainless steel plates are tapered, and I can only imagine what's going on inside here. But this port is connected to this port, and this one is connected to this one. So this is one hot loop which exchanges via conduction. In other words, it heats the stainless steel, and the stainless steel then heats the water in this loop. Excellent. So what I'll do is I'll run the engine hot water circuit through one side of this, and that will heat this up, and then the hot water loop that is the heating system will run through the other side of this heat exchanger, the Webasto, the water heater, and all the space heaters, sort of. But anyway, we'll get to that later. Anyway, that way when I'm running just the Webasto, all that will happen is the hot water will come through here. It'll heat this up, yes, but because there won't be any circulating water on the other side of the heat exchanger, it won't heat up the whole engine. And you know, there are times when you might say you want to preheat your engine, but I don't think that's very common on a boat where it's indoors anyway. So it's always at least at room temperature. So I'm not concerned about that at all. So there's another reason to keep the engine hot water in a separate loop from the heat hot water, and that's this coolant is poisonous. This is regular car antifreeze, and when you run it straight through your hot water heater, if there was a leak, that hot water would be polluted, poisoned by the antifreeze from the engine. I don't know if that's a big concern. I don't know if it happens a lot, and lots of boats are set up like that. I don't want to cause any panic, but I just figured it's an extra perk. So this heat exchanger will effectively separate the poisonous coolant that's on the engine side from the not poisonous, although there will be an antifreeze in this possible, but it'll be plumbing, potable antifreeze in the rest of the circuit. Okay, have you had enough of that? First things first, I gotta plumb this in somewhere on the engine side, and then we'll carry on with the rest of it and more explanation. Gotta find a place for this. Okay, so I've settled on this spot down here on the engine bed in an area where there isn't any other stuff really going on. There's plenty of area, room to service the transmission. This will be on a plate that makes it easily removable. It's easy access for the hoses from the engine, and right here is going to go the Webasto. So that has a good relationship to plumbing to that, and that plumbing will come out through here and along. The Webasto, of course, has an exhaust which will go out the port side of the boat, and I think that'll work out quite neatly. So I just got to make the little plate because this has a couple of little studs and bolts on the backside that I can do that with. Okay, so here's my plate. 2 holes for the mounts on the bottom of the heat exchanger, which are a little annoying because they're actually standoffs. I'll show you how I'll deal with those. And then to put some wood screws down into the engine bed. And to deal with these standoffs, I'm just going to put 2 pieces of foam backer rod in here, which will accommodate that. Now I put the holes in this offset slightly, and I'll show you why in a minute. It's because the heat exchanger has to be moved over enough to allow the future sound insulation to tuck in there. All right, so let's just put this together. I'm going to put it together dry at first, but as soon as I get it all on and tight, I'm going to put a little Loctite on these because I do not want these coming loose in the future underneath. Okay, so once I get them down enough that they'll hold it in place, I'll exchange them with a little drop of Loctite. A little drop, Peter. Yeah. There we go. And there we go. Now this will draw the ire of a few of you. These are the fittings I'm going to use, and if you have a keen eye, you'll notice that these are actually PEX fittings. They're 3/4 inch PEX fittings. Well, I can tell you that 3/4 inch PEX fitting is absolutely a perfect barb connection for 5/8 hose. It's just fabulous, and I'm going to use it throughout the boat in low pressure situations. Well, for the heating system, basically. I'm also going to use it for a toilet system, but we'll get into that later. Anyway, forgive me. Let's get going. If you're looking to buy one of these and you're looking online at Amazon, etc., be very careful, because many of them come with straight threads. It's hard to find a source of these with proper tapered pipe thread, and this company here is where I got this one, although it did come off Amazon. I'll put a link down below if I remember. All right, let's get these tightened up. Okay, with the heat exchanger in, it's time to connect up the engine side of the hot water line. Now, the trick is I want to make sure I know which direction the flow is coming through here, because when I get to the heat exchanger, I want to make sure the hottest end, in other words, where the water is going in, is where the heated water is coming out. That way the hot ends are always together. Standard heat exchanger practice. I'm pretty sure I should know this, but the hot water is coming from the head and returning to the heat exchanger, but I'm just going to start the engine and see which side gets warm quicker. Alright, so it definitely got hotter at the head quicker. The other way of testing that would be to take the hose off and see which way it gushes, but I'd rather not fill the bilge with antifreeze. I suppose the final way to know is just to know. Yeah. Okay, let's get to it. Of course, I did manage to spray just a little bit of coolant around as I'm recovering it here, because I forgot it would be under pressure having to run it. I drained the coolant just as I ran out of places to put it. Okay, so we'll work that along to here. And this one will come along here and right on to there. Couple hose clamps. There we go. Nice, 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 nice. Another reason to mount the heat exchanger nice and low is that it's essential that it's lower than the header tank or the radiator cap anyway, so that there's no chance air gets trapped in it. Okay, lovely. There we go. All right, and let's put this coolant back in. All right then, of course it took just a tiny little bit of extra water to fill the heat exchanger. But there may be an air bubble in one of these lines anyway, so I'm going to start the engine again and circulate all that water and make sure it's not leaking. Well, there we go, running for 10 minutes and no leaks at all. Very, very pleased. So now we can connect up the second part of it. Woohoo! Okay, so I've got the steps back out again, because the routing is going to be these two lines to the hot water heater are going to go through this aft bulkhead of the box, engine box right there, and along in a void through here. Now, the Webasto heater will go right here eventually, and so I've just looked at the drawings for it to line up as neatly as the hoses come out of there. Now, the Webasto has a built-in circulation pump, because this part of the circuit's going to need a circulation pump. But until I get the Webasto, I'm just going to use a cheap little knockoff one that actually works quite well, and set it right in here, and that should work great. Let's drill some holes. Nice. Okay, so the pump is going to go on the return side of this, which is the lower hole. And let's put the pump in place. And these centrifugal pumps, basically they go in the center and out on the radial part of it. There we go. And a length of silicone. Also, the hose clamp. I'm having to use a little bit of regular black rubber heater hose because I don't have enough of the silicone for now, but when I put the Webasto in, that'll be a good time to change that. Okay, nice and neat, I like that. And down here, and onto there with its hose clamp. Okay, to the hot side. And down on to the hot fitting. Okay. Get a nice arc on that, right about like that. This is where the hot water is going to go into the hot water heater. Now, we have to do something different here. We have to put in a vent because this is a closed loop. There's just this water circulates round and round, and if it picks up any air, certainly initially, it needs to be able to come off somehow. So we're going to put this T in here, and what that'll do is it'll allow me to continue this hose on and up to a header tank at some point when I can get one, and off the bottom of the T will go in to the hot water heater here. So let's get that going. T. The other side, that's going to be the vent. Now this is effectively a poor man's air trap, and you'll notice that the water is going to flow through the T and make a 90-degree. Well, what that'll do is it'll encourage bubbles to move on and up towards the vent. It would be better if this was vertical, but this is going to be just fine. And a wire comes through. That's going to be the main feed for the pump, and this will be connected basically to the ignition. So anytime the engine is running, the pump is circulating, transferring that heat to the hot water. That of course can be overridden, and all of this will change when the Webasto comes. And while I've got this open, it's a good time to install all the proper fuel metal, rubber on metal P-clips for the fuel system that I never put in. And then this whole area will be relatively tidy. I mean, relatively tidy. Okay, so for a combination of temporary and final, I'm actually really pleased with the way this is going together, and it's time to fill it and test it. All right, so I'm going to weave the vent up in here. Again, this is not the final vent because it'll have a header tank eventually. So we just got to fill the system, and I didn't actually plan this, but very convenient. All buttoned up. All that's left to do is to try it. And well, I'm going to start the engine. The hot water heater is currently cold. The circulation pump will start, and we'll see how long it takes for the engine to actually produce some hot water at the tap. Now, I'm here at the marina. I'm going to put it in gear slightly off idle. It's not going to get very hot. So I'm kind of curious to see what that'll do and how long it'll take. Okay, I'll check in with you in a bit. Okay, I don't know if you'll find this interesting. The engine's been running for 10 minutes. I have my handy dandy temperature gun here, and water entering the hot water heater is at about 185 degrees, and water leaving the hot water heater is only at 41 degrees. So that's great. It means that the cold water in the hot water heater is stripping a lot of heat off that water. So that's working pretty well. I'm loving this. And at the sink, it's not hot, but it's really quite warm. Okay, that's been fun. We don't need to carry on anymore. Basically, I can make hot water from running the engine. 15 minutes, and it already heated the whole tank up to plenty warm to have a shower or wash dishes. I'm just loving this. Okay, there's one more job done.
I wanted to draw you a quick schematic of this heating system because we didn't really get into the space heating part. So we have the engine here and the heat exchanger. So the hot water comes out of the engine, cycles through the heat exchanger and returns cooler, perhaps. And out of the heat exchanger, we have another circuit, which I'm going to call the primary loop. And it leaves the heat exchanger hot and returns, well, cooler. And it's fed by a pump. Because now we need a way to circulate that water. And that water is primarily circulated through the hot water tank, and it heats the water in the hot water tank. So we loop hot water around the loop from the engine, and it heats the heat exchanger, and we loop water around the primary loop from the heat exchanger, which heats the hot water tank. Okay. So now once that hot water is hot, we might as well make some use of it. And for that, we're going to heat the space in the boat. So if we tap off that primary circuit with another circuit, circulate it with a pump and return it just slightly downstream on the primary circuit, what that'll do, that'll rob hot water from the primary circuit and send it around the secondary circuit. And so to get space heat off that secondary circuit, we'll just add our bus heaters. But you notice they're in a bypass mode. The hot water is going to go right across the top of those T's it's connected to and not drive the circuits at all. So to force the hot water through the bus heaters, we simply put a ball valve in each of the bypasses. And that's great because that allows the ability to balance them. In other words, a fully closed ball valve forces all the water through the bus heater, and a fully open one forces none. So that's a great way of balancing the individual heaters. And then the final step is to remove the circulation pump on the primary circuit and replace it with the Webasto. Now I can run several different modes. The simplest is turn the Webasto on, which has its own circulation pump, and it will move hot water through the hot water heater back across a secondary loop through the heat exchanger to the engine. But because the engine isn't on, none of that heat is sucked off to the engine, and because the secondary loop isn't turned on, none of that heat is sucked on. Very, very simple. Now, if the engine is running, the heat can come from the engine to the first engine heat exchanger and be circulated by the Webasto, even if the Webasto isn't turned on. And then the final mode is when we want space heating, in which case the Webasto and or the engine create the heat, and it's stripped off by the secondary loop and passed through the various bus heaters. That's it in a nutshell. There's a lot more to it, really, though.
And welcome to the Travels with Geordie Beer of the Week. A real special thing, this beer of the week. This is from my local Spinnaker's Brewery, just down around the corner here, and it's called Keg Tosser. It's a wee heavy Scotch ale coming in at 8%, and I've never actually had this. It's either new or I've completely missed it somehow. But anyway, we'll see what we think of this. I thought it would be darker, but well, it's actually got a lovely color to it. Very, very nice. Well, so pleased to get that heating system in, and I'll be able to have hot water and hot showers while cruising this summer, so I'm really, really looking forward to that. Well, that it doesn't quite fit. Very, very close. Keg Tosser. That is a lovely color. Oh! Okay. Fast favorite. It's not often I say that. That's caramelly, and it's heavy, but it's not. Oh, that is so good. If you get to Victoria, well, you got to go to Spinnaker's anyway. Wee heavy Scotch ale, Keg Tosser. Okay, that is so good. Okay, we only had one day worth of comments for yesterday's winner of the Travels with Geordie t-shirt, and the winner is Tom Kiefer. So Tom, get a hold of me, and congratulations. We'll make sure you get your t-shirt. And fabulously, a new supporter on Patreon. I had to ask Google to help me pronounce this. Torbjorn Lund. Thank you ever so much for coming aboard on Patreon. Cheers. As well as I'd like to thank ongoing support from Paul Beglane on PayPal. You're a real trooper. Thanks, Paul. About 8%, that's going to catch up with me pretty quick. Okay, nothing left but the word of the week. And, well, you probably saw it coming. I don't know how you're going to use it. The Travels with Geordie word of the week this week is hot. Hot water, etc. You know. Anyway, if you'd like to win a Travels with Geordie t-shirt, simply use the word hot in a comment down below, and I'll pick at random over the next week or so worth of comments, and if I pick you, you'll win a Travels with Geordie t-shirt. Hot. Oh, yes, yes,